Morning thought, educate. Every generation sees something wrong with the generation before them, and those find something wrong with the ones after them. The old blame the young, and the young are lost. If the preceding generation does not invest in educating their young, all cultural inheritance and traditions will be lost to history. If there is no education of the young, the ways of life will be eradicated and identities will be buried with the elders. My name is Zibuse L Kunene. Come with me on the journey to empowered thinking. Right, so today's morning thought on this particular day, which was the 4th of January, about education, or the title is educate, meaning that, it's something that we must do. It's a noun. It's a doing. Is it a noun or is it a verb? It's a verb, doing word. So we must do, we must educate, because what happens is when we don't educate, whatever it is that we've learned, whatever it is that we've gained, will be lost to the annals of history. Think about it this way. There used to be a time when we told stories, and there were different versions of every story, but the story would always change. The finer details would always change, but in essence, the overall lesson of the story never changed. It stayed the same because there was something to be learned from there. There was something to be appreciated in that journey, in that lesson. And therefore, it's important that we know the stories from our past. We know and we remember what the stories are, and then we tell those stories to those who come after us, because that's how we get to pass it down. And we do that through repetition. It may be one story. The more we tell it, the more it stays in the mind. So the generation before us, they told us certain stories. There are details about certain atrocities of the past that most of us may not remember. But because the stories were told, we get to appreciate the detail and the accounts of what actually happened. However, we also need to be cognizant that as people, we don't always remember details of the past accurately. We either look at the past and over romanticize how good things were or how bad things were. Either way, we can remember certain details from the past which are accurate. But because over time and through life experiences, our feelings towards certain things change, and we experience new things. Things tend to be different. Things tend to change. And even our recollection of those events tend to change. And then we find ourselves at a point where we're like, okay, now things have changed, but I remember the past as this, depending on where we are. If you're in a good place, you remember the past and it was painful, it will be this horrible past. But if you're in the bad days and you think of the past as something that was good, you will always think of the past as something that has always been good. But it was never really the way you remember it. But the details may be true. It's just the emotion that we attach to those events of the past that change. Now, coming back to us educating those who come after us, it's so that there will always be a memory of what happened. There will always be a story of what happened. There will always be a story where our children and their children and their children and their children will tell it, if we can teach them the art of storytelling. But we need to learn the art of storytelling. And the thing about the art of storytelling is that you do not rush it. You put as much detail as possible, and then you engage the listener. You engage their senses. You learn to speed up certain things when you really want to gloss over them, but then you tend to slow down on the most important parts of the story that you want to emphasize. And when there's an emotion, you also tend to bring that out. So the listener is really captivated and they really can't wait for the next part of the story. And this is what those who are making film and television, especially the sequels and the series, they've gotten that right. They, even though at times I think they tend to overkill it, but what they do is in a series, they will keep you engaged from one episode to the next, one episode to the next. And even those times the episodes may have a theme, but there's always an underlying story that carries through. And then you get to the end of the series and something else happens, and then boom, something has changed. And there's a twist that wants you thinking, I want to go to the next series. Similarly with movies. So when we tell stories, when we want to engage, and when we want to educate, and when we want to pass on the history, we need to craft it in such a way that we package it in a story format. And when we put it in a story format, we then say, this is how you're going to tell the story. This is how we tell the stories. So that when we tell the story, they remember. When they tell the story, then they teach too, because they've been taught. So each and every person gets to learn. Each and every person gets to pass on something. So let's educate, do better, and empower our thinking through these morning thoughts.